Good afternoon, folks. And before we get started, I would be remiss if I didn't allow Ms. Lee Hubbard, to share some opening remarks, and of course, our esteemed President, Chief Van Dorp, to follow up with some remarks as well before we get into today's discussion, where we talk about strategies for student engagement in all learning environments. So, without further ado, Lee.
Well, thanks. I'll just remind you guys that we're super excited to have a sponsor of this event, which is Fire Department Coffee. And at some point during this, Demond's going to ask you a trick question, and we're going to use the chat feature for you to answer that trick question so that you can get a really cool ISFSI coffee mug and a pound of Fire Department coffee. Just to catch you up a little bit on some things that are going on with ISFSI, if you're not aware, we're currently in the pilot of our mentor program. We had 48 people jump in on that program as mentees, and we have about 20 some odd mentors. Might even at some point during this conversation get one of those guys. I think Caleb, you're in there as a mentee. Maybe give a brief update to this group about how that's going. Other things, we're wrapping up our Understanding Fighting Basement Fire grant delivery. Those classes will be done by spring of 2022. And we've had a great kickoff call for our NFPA 1700 grant, which we were notified that we received here in September, and we're hitting the ground running with that, which will also be 12 regional deliveries around the United States. So to say we're busy is an understatement. To say we're super excited is an understatement. We're happy to be doing what we're doing, and I'd say we're incredibly relevant in the fire service right now. And you know, the people that are on this call are some of the most active people we have in the organization. And for those names I don't recognize, send me an email. Let's get you involved. Let's get you, you know, don't let it be intimidating. You know, we can put you in a place that suits you best so that we can, you know, learn more about you and get you engaged in an area of the organization that would suit you best.
Thank you for those kind words. And once again, also, thank you again for sending out that reminder a little while ago in regards to how individuals can start and stay engaged in this great organization.
Yes, indeed.
Chief, how's your voice?
It's back. I just, Demond asked, because I was just out in California. I did a series of presentations for 5 days. So 6 to 7 hours a day for 5 days. I felt sorry for the guys in Sacramento on day 5 because I was squeaking a lot as I was talking. But thanks for the hospitality, Demond. Your department, like all the others, treated me very well. Appreciated being out there. As Lee mentioned, we got a lot going on, and it's all good. It really is all good. The feedback from the basement fires class has just been absolutely phenomenal. And that will, of course, work to our advantage as we develop and then implement the 1700 class, and just the good name of the organization. Every time we have a class like that and we get that kind of feedback, it just does all that much more for the organization. So I don't want to get in the way of what you got planned today, Demond. So we'll let you get started. And
no rush at all,
waiting
sir.
on me to tap dance for you for a little while here, getting something ready.
Yeah, no rush at all, sir.
All right, very good.
Yeah, once again, on behalf of all the men and women out here in Northern California, thank you for coming out. Got great feedback on your presentation, your energy, your delivery, and all that good stuff. And it definitely was game changing for some of our younger members who may not be aware of some of the great work that's being done in the fire service as it relates to research and delivery, or research as it relates to fire dynamics. So once again, thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. And the feedback was phenomenal. And for those that are, you know, I think one of the things that impressed me the last time I was out there was maybe 8 years ago, and the change in the tenor of the response to the work being done by UL is just like the tipping point has long been reached. You know, there's still questions, there's still some misunderstanding, but the antagonism is gone, absolutely gone. And people they're eager to hear this. They're eager to hear what's coming down next. And when we do classes, as long as the topic came up, like the basement fires, PMFA, and the 1700 class, obviously, everything that we do, we agreed as a board when we did our strategic plan to limit any training presentations, any training work that we did to stuff that was grounded in research, because we didn't want to be a player in the training game in general. That's not at the core of our mission, but because of our history with UL and other research organizations, and because of the work that we've done up to this point, we didn't want to abandon that. So it's really good to see that UL is still engaged with us, that we're still engaged with UL and other research partners, and that's the way we'll continue going forward. So
thank you, sir. All right, continuing on, looking at some of my fellow colleagues that are on the publications working group. Jeff, thank you for logging in. It looks like you're in your vehicle, so at any point in time, feel free to interject as we touch on high points related to student engagement in all learning environments. Because this discussion today is about student engagement in all learning environments, I would be remiss if I sat here for the next 45, 50 minutes and showed a bunch of PowerPoint slides and talked, and you guys actively listened in some cases and passively listened in some cases, and then at the end we all go our separate ways. So with that being said, this is going to be interactive for a number of reasons, primarily because all of us on here, we have or currently teach, instruct in some capacity, whether it's at a junior college that has a fire science program, or four-year university teaching in the undergraduate or graduate program, or we are training chiefs or training directors for our respective fire departments, or we are out in the company still, and as company and chief officers, we are responsible for both company and battalion level training. So we're going to discuss some best practices and strategies that have been proven to be effective in the delivery of technical and skills to satisfy some. Real quickly, short hands, how many?
Hey, Demond, if you can hear me, you're cutting out.
You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go ahead and remove my video and see if that helps.
We lost you on.
Okay, can you guys hear me now? Is that better? Okay, so I'm at work right now, and unfortunately, even though I'm in Silicon Valley, the technology hub, I'm in a bad location as it relates to internet. So stuff happens. Nevertheless, we move on. But the question I pose out there, how many of us are current instructors at a junior college, or college for that matter? None of us? How many of us? How many of us are instructors for our department's fire academy or training division? All right, good. I got a couple. So I'm gonna pick on Caleb first. So Caleb, you're in charge of training or delivering training in some capacity. What are some of the things that you do to satisfy what we call, for lack of a better term, student engagement or firefighter engagement when they come down to your training division for a class, and or they come down to your training division for some type of hands-on training or evolution?
I guess the for that is to try to make it realistic or make it applicable to what they will be facing. So I try not to do anything that, you know, maybe wouldn't be, they wouldn't face, I guess, in the field.
And one point in particular that highlights you add some realism to your class? Well, we know in today's fire service, whether you are teaching or instructing aspiring firefighters or incumbent firefighters, we know that sitting in a classroom and just lecturing for an hour or 2 or 3 hours is not effective as it relates to learning. We know that based on research, there has to be what we call some active learning take place. And in a few moments, I'm gonna provide a couple of definitions of what active learning means from a perspective of an original definition and a more up-to-date definition of adult learning, of active learning. But Caleb, you talked about some realism. So for example, what are one or two things that are part of your teaching strategy that satisfies realism or realistic?
So I'll take calls that either us or one of our neighboring agencies ran and then apply those across the shift. So whether it be a fire or something like that, I apply it to our burn building, and then I'll use a sim on either the MDTs or people's phones or iPads to give them that view whenever they show up to the drill.
And have you found that particular strategy to be effective in some sense?
To an extent, you can't completely recreate it, but to an extent it works. At least it has gotten away from people throwing ladders to every second story, especially whenever, the sim is a first story fire. It just gives them the opportunity to think.
What I'm going to do now to kind of help bound this our discussion in regards to strategies for engagement, I'm going to highlight two terms. Term number one is pedagogy, pedagogical learning practices. Pedagogical learning practices relate to principles and strategies for teaching kids or K through 12 students. And then andragogy, or adult learning, these are principles and strategies for teaching in the adult learning environment. Now we know strategies in teaching in the adult learning environment versus the pediatric or the K through 12 learning environment are vastly different. We'll take the case, in Caleb's case, you're dealing with incumbent firefighters. So these individuals, they have life experiences, they have professional experiences. And so when they come to a classroom setting, yes, we know that oftentimes they're coming to a class because it's mandatory or something that's placed on the schedule. But their reasons for coming to class or to a training session are vastly different than a young man or young woman who's in high school or who is in junior high. And that's important to know, because as we devise strategies to affect learning, whether we are teaching in a K through 12 environment or junior college environment, or in our case, in a professional fire service environment, not all strategies are applicable. The reasons for being in that learning environment, whether it's in the fire station, at the training division, on the training ground, or out in the field, or in the classroom at a community college or four-year university setting, are vastly different. Adults, we take classes for promotional reasons. We take classes to help us solve a problem. We take classes to enhance our professional development in a given area, whether it's engine company operations, truck company operations, EMS, hazmat, technical rescue, and all that great stuff. So for us as instructors, when we talk about this concept of student engagement, there's many definitions that you can associate with student engagement. One definition of student engagement is when students show up to class or they show up to the training division excited to learn. They participate in the learning process and they demonstrate a positive attitude. And some of you probably saying, this guy must have never been in the fire service, because we know when our young men and women show up to a training division class, especially one in the afternoon, their level of motivation is not often that high unless there's someone who's on probation or they're getting ready to go through a promotional process. But looking at this student engagement from a more modern perspective, it talks about a long-term disposition towards learning, views learning as fun, seeing it as important, seeing the value of working with and functioning as part of a team and being part of a social institution. All of us would not be part of this great organization known as ISFSI if we were not passionate, one, about the fire service, two, if we were not passionate about sharing our knowledge, experiences, and technical skills with the current and future generation of young men and women who are in the fire service. All of us on here all fit that description as it relates to being instructors in this great profession. Tying back to the central theme here, how do we keep our firefighters engaged as it relates to learning? For those of us who are teaching or instructing at a community college setting in a pre-service fire academy or in your basic core FSI fire science courses, how do you keep these young men and women engaged so that the foundation that you're setting up for them, they can retain that information, they can retain those skills, and then when they now are employed with a fire service organization somewhere in the United States or Canada, they can continue building that foundation, and when they graduate, they can be competent professional firefighters when they're out there in the companies riding on a engine or a truck. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So, getting some key academic terms out of the way. We talked about the difference between pedagogy versus andragogy. Talked about student engagement, what that means. So, Vince, you may mention that you are an instructor at your academy in some capacity, or you are in charge of training out there. Halifax, Nova Scotia, right? All right. So when we talk about student engagement, what are some of the things that you guys do to keep the firefighters engaged in the learning process?
So I would say one of the first things that we do is we always talk about the millennials. The millennials need to know why, but usually we have to explain why, whether it's for a new recruit class or whether they're doing hands-on training with the incumbents, is why is this important to learn? And that would usually go down to, it's our hook. Why is this training important, and how do we get them motivated to learn it and get involved in it? So we usually have a hook, whether it's a case study, or you talk about an accident that happened or a certain fire that we had, and solving that problem that came up in that fire is what this, that new recruits, it would be, why we're learning to advance hose a certain way that Peter Van Dorp showed us. It's because this will make it easier, faster, safer, whatever the hook is. We try to get them motivated by explaining why they need to learn or be motivated to understand and learn the topic that we're dealing with.
In no order of importance, Chief, you made mention of starting with the why. All of us are probably familiar with the gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek, who has a famous TED Talk with several of them, and one of them talks about starts with why. You made mention millennials, and they always want to know why. Well, they're not the only ones that I've come across who want to know why. I know some 50, 60, 70-year-old men who are part of the fire service. They want to know why. Why I need to be here today for this class. Why is this important? Why are we doing this? We've never done it this way. So starting with that why is very important. Now, how you're going to present that why is going to obviously vary. Are you teaching on the subject as it relates to, or you're applying it to 18, 19-year-old kids who are taking their first, second, third, fourth fire science course? Or are you teaching a course, in-service training course in fire dynamics to the men and women of the Chicago Fire Department? Is that why going to be different? Things to think about. You as an instructors, when you are preparing for your delivery, and Vince, you made mention of that, having that hook statement. You also identified another strategy that satisfies student engagement. And before I go any further talking about what you just highlighted, why is student engagement important? Student or / firefighter engagement important? Research has shown that there's a link between student engagement and increased achievement. When instructors and teachers use strategies designed to capture students' attention and actively involve them in the learning process, achievement or learning satisfies. When Chief Van Dorp was in charge of training the Chicago Fire Department, he didn't necessarily schedule classes for the engine and truck companies to come down there just to check a box. He satisfied classes. He scheduled classes. He had folks come down and go through training and education so that they can continue to be better firefighters, grow, operate more efficiently out there in the hazard zone, and probably most importantly, come home in the same capacity that they came to work. So when we talk about that why, talked about student engagement, what that means, why student engagement is important. So Chief Conrad, you made mention of using case studies. Why do you guys use case studies for some of your in-service training?
So a lot of it is to make it relevant that these things actually could happen. I mean, like Caleb said, we try to make it as realistic as possible. This is an incident that you may come across. We identify like the issue that comes up and how we see as a group. And a lot of the time it's a discussion with the crew, how they would go forward with and figure out the case study for themselves and then apply it. So it helps with the realism and motivating them. Keeping them engaged.
Engaged. Once again, part of that student engagement or firefighter engagement is to keep them excited about learning and developing strategies and activities and assignments, whether you are instructing in the real time or face-to-face format, or what we have seen an increase of, not just because COVID, but long prior to that with technology advancements, is in an online virtual environment, whether you are teaching in a synchronous mode or in an asynchronous mode. So case studies, I'll talk more about that a little later on, are a perfect example that's relatively inexpensive, in many cases free, especially if you're gonna grab a NIOSH report and use that to help convey theories and practices and affect some type of learning, tying that case studies. Now, a case study wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in some aspects if I was teaching a fire dynamics class to 16, 17-year-olds versus incumbent firefighters. But if I did, I would definitely have to make sure I alter it in some manner to where the learning objective is still being met. So continuing on, as we talk about student engagement, active learning, what else do we know about today's learners, firefighters who have to take classes, participate in training evolutions to satisfy professional development? We know one, they don't like to sit there and be lectured to, talked down upon. What else do we know about today's learners?
I think it's, I think that all of us, it's not, we tend to say it's the younger student, but all of our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. It's just the way we digest information nowadays. None of us sit down and read the newspaper. We read news feeds, Twitter, Instagram, the whole 9 yards. Our attention spans are shrinking, and our training should probably reflect that.
So Chief Van Dorp, you hit on a high point. You said attention spans. On average, based on research, our attention span is between 10 to 15 minutes. So think of, you are an instructor in a class or in an online environment. You're teaching a class on building construction or fire dynamics or engine company operations or truck company operations. And you're lecturing for about an hour or two straight. You are in your groove. You're getting a few nods from the students in the class or firefighters in the class. You're feeling good. Do you think you have lost a great majority of the participants in the class at about the 25, 30-minute mark? I see Mike shaking your head. Mike, what do you think?
I agree. I think Chief brings up a good point that we've often gone to looking to social media for outlets of the training in a world where we couldn't get together, and that's been both positive and negative. Because we talk about trying to stay fresh and trying to keep engaged, but the issue is with the world of social media and everybody having these small little phones in their hands, they want to second guess everybody. They want to discredit. It seems like there's so many out there that are trying to take a moment to discredit what they're hearing or they saw on a different social media post that maybe that wasn't the best or right way. So Trying to keep them engaged beyond that 20-minute mark is usually something big, and whether that's getting them engaged by making a group discussion come up from that, or bring up a point to allow them to give that input that maybe they did learn somewhere.
How many of us are familiar with the concept of chunk learning or chunking the learning process? Some of you may have heard of Chief Conrad, thumbs up. Okay, so basically what chunking is, or chunk learning is that you are taking a topic or a segment or a topic and breaking up into small chunks. So for example, instead of lecturing for an hour on 3, 4, 5 different topics or subtopics, you'll lecture for about 10 to 15 minutes on a topic. That keeps you in that range of you're making sure your students stay focused, and then you come in with some type of activity or discussion questions, as you just mentioned, Mike, to engage the students in the learning process, which is what we call active learning. Active learning is involving students in doing things and thinking about the things that they're doing. It also, active learning is about learning by doing, applied learning, teaching, role plays, case-based learning, simulations, all those good things. So keep that in mind for those of us, whether you are teaching in an online environment or you're teaching face-to-face, to keep your students engaged. Go for about 10 to 15 minutes on a given topic or subtopic, and then have an activity or an exercise in place that will allow them to apply the concept, retain some aspects of the concept, and then along that way, you can also evaluate whether learning is taking place. Because if you spend an hour or two lecturing on something and come to find out students didn't necessarily learn anything, that's an hour and a half of time wasted. Whereas if you use the chunk learning concept and went up for about 10 to 15 minutes, you wouldn't necessarily be that far behind. As we talk about active learning, this is an example that all of us can relate to as professional firefighters. When we get dispatched out to a structure fire, how many of us like to be outside doing nothing? None of us, right? We all want to be inside, stretching a line, trying to find the seat of the fire, doing a search, or topside, performing topside ventilation. None of us like to be on the sidelines. So think of that in the context of your students. Think of that in the context of your firefighters who are coming down to the division for some type of professional development. Don't present a class in a format to where they're acting as spectators. Present the class, use strategies and tactics in a manner that allows them to be participants in the learning process. Once again, research has shown that when our firefighters and students and learners, using it from a generic perspective, are part of the learning process, achievement happens at a greater degree. So we talked about some strategies. We talked about realism. Chief Conrad talked about the use of case studies, chunk learning. And once again, chunking, if you're not quite familiar with it, you can go online, type in chunk learning. One of the things that I do with the online class that I teach is that I will pre-record lectures on a given topic, and I'll keep that lecture to about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, some of the benefits of recording your lecture, some people refer to them as micro lectures because they're short in nature, is that your students, they can view that lecture or listen to that lecture whenever and how often they see fit. So if Chief Van Dorp is teaching a class on fire dynamics, and he's talking about temperature, heat flux, heat, fire chemistry, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, Chief Van Dorp's in the bed sleep, and that young man or young woman is having a hard time sleeping, or they're at work, they've had a bunch of calls, and they say, forget it, I'm just going to stay awake. They can go online and view that short 10 to 15 minute lecture. How online learn, especially when you're using a learning management system, whether it's Moodle or Black, all these activities that I've talked about are, and that and a few others that I will mention, they're all relatively free to incorporate, and it allows us as instructors, which could be good or bad, to maintain 24/7 access with our students, our firefighters. Because once again, as members of the ISFSI, we're here because we are proponents and champions related to training and education in fire service, both here and abroad. Anyone else in here instructs?
Demond, you're starting to cut out a little bit again. So you may be having a couple internet issues. Can you still hear us? Yeah, my guess is that he's locked up because I'm not echoing anymore. I've been having to mute and unmute him every single time we talk. So, well, I had posed a question. Mark Matheson earlier had said that, making sure that the information and content was fresh and new. And I specifically wanted to know more about VR, and if any departments are using VR training as a way to kind of bring in a degree of freshness to their training departments. This kind of came about for me because I was talking to a potential vendor for an associate in management. So is anybody using this? Nobody's using it yet?
So it depends.
We aren't necessarily, but
Google Glasses or something like that with virtual reality 3D. Because we do virtual training with, like, say, Blue Card, you're using pictures and 2D simulation. And we do have a driving simulator, which is like a video game that you sit in and drive, which is nice to supplement code responses, because you can't really practice that in a truck. But it's not immersive virtual reality. That's a little different.
Yeah, I'm only familiar with it like third hand. The Chicago Fire Department got some funding through their foundation to provide training for kids to do public education, fire safety training. And so far, to the best of my knowledge, the roadblock, or the stumbling block, if you will, is the development cost. To do it well, to make it worth doing the development of the programs, it's pretty extensive. So I think it's one of those things where technology will help us get the cost down over time. It's not so much the widgets, that cost has come down, but I think anybody that's done fire simulations, as simple as they are, know how much effort you have to put in to get yourself one good simulation. And if you times that by 10 or 100, sometimes that's what you need for the virtual reality stuff. So hopefully, as all of this gets, just a little more mainstream, we'll find it, because it does have value, and particularly in engaging the student, because it changes the environment. It's novel, it's interesting, right? It's different. It has all those things that we've been talking about that help get the student engaged and make the training memorable. So hopefully we'll get some of the cast off equipment and things from the military over time, and maybe be able to adapt what they've been doing.
I know the state of Kentucky was looking at a trailer at one time that had some weighted hoses, things like that nature, but it was using screens inside to give, and it wasn't so much, I think, more for the, it was more to create routine, I think. of moving the things and working in teams, and so you got to see some of it, but of course weren't feeling some of that realism. Then of course you've got your companies that do like, which I believe used to be BullX, it's Lion now, but they have the virtual reality of fire extinguisher trainers, where it's actually a screen and it utilizes a beam from the fire extinguisher. I think that's kind of that first step that we've kind of come across, but it has um, kind of expanded the ability to offer those kind of trainings to other people. So it, just like with online training and everything else, it's a tool, and I think it has a place. But yeah, to walk into a room and see 10 or 12 firefighters sitting around with this headgear on and looking at screens, I think would be kind of a scary thing for the future of firefighting, to be honest.
It's funny that you should mention that, Mike. I've had a couple of you guys on my social media platforms, and I love watching. And my daily entertainment when I'm going to bed at night is looking at the stuff y'all post, and it's hilarious to see because they're basically posting like Snapchats and Instagram videos and stuff of these guys sitting in a regular chair like this with these big things on, and they're like attacking things and they're going crazy. So it's funny to watch it from the outside perspective.
I spoke with one of our local departments, the training officer there. They've got like a demo of basically like the Oculus type thing that they're using right now, and they have a program with it and everything. And they like, you cannot tell the difference between reality and virtual reality when you're in the thing. Like it feels real to you. So I think there's like some important stuff to that, but I saw somebody in the chat mention like it will never be a replacement, but it's definitely another thing to kind of add to what we're doing.
We are just starting to dip our toes into the whole VR, starting to research it and integrate it into our officer exams, stuff like that. But I can tell you what I've found so far is it is way more work for the training staff to build those scenarios and and to understand the technology. Like, we have to learn it first in order to be very effective with it. And so it's not just, you can't take it lightly and go, oh, we're just going to start doing this. It takes a lot. Even something as simple as taking like the blue card scenarios and building them, it takes a lot of know-how to figure all that part out. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to find that, and I would hazard to suggest that if you're looking to develop this or adopt it in your department, you look for stuff that's being developed for a broader market first. So if you look at like emergency medicine, for instance, right? I mean, more of that's going to be developed because the market there is so much broader, and there's a lot more resources going into developing that sort of stuff, and looking to adopt that into your training, and then that way to introduce it into your department and yourselves and your training, program. Because because there's the broader market, it's going to be that much more accessible, cheaper, and there's going to be a lot more resources put into the development of it. And then I also think we look for, as we're doing this, the stuff that's germane to your own department is going to be way down the road, but there's probably plenty of opportunities of stuff that's germane to the fire service in general. Again, that will be developed for a broader audience, and that might be that much more affordable then, and easier to implement.
Is that something that ISFSI should be having a conversation about? I mean, Dave's comment that from an instructional perspective, it's a challenge because they're learning a whole new teaching methodology. Is that something that we should be having a discussion about? Should we be exploring instructional best practices as it relates to VR training, regardless of what the device is?
I think we should, and I think it should focus on the, getting the instructor community familiar with, as Dave was saying, how much effort this takes, how much time it takes, what are the steps. I think most of us, I certainly wouldn't know, what do I need to know first, right, about this, and then what do I need to after that. So if we could provide nothing more than the roadmap of how do you become an expert in this, and that guidance, I think that would help people a lot.
It's like using gamification, right? It's a fantastic tool, and it engages firefighters anytime they can compete against each other, I mean, it's easy, right? But it can quickly become a distraction if you're sitting there fiddling through how to make that game work or that app work or whatever else. So it is, technology is a double-edged sword in that respect, that if you're not efficient with it, it does become a distraction. So yeah, I think that'd be great from the ISFSI perspective, those kinds of, however you want to call it, training module or webinar for that.
Yep.
Well, Dave brought it up. I am nominating you to chair that new committee. I'm just kidding. You do a lot for us already. I'll find somebody.
It's funny you say that, though. That gets back to the point of time, right? And that's what I was trying to get at with, if you're going to use like a VR or gaming, whatever, it's, as an instructor, as a training officer, is do you have the time to dedicate towards you learning that new technology and implementing it properly, right?
Yeah, I mean, you actually, while you were talking about it, I've actually just made a note to myself that I want to go back to this vendor and say, as we explore this relationship, I want you to help build this roadmap from a non-competitive, non-sales pitch. But like, that needs to be your give back to our membership, is this free tool of how to do that. So and it looks like Demond was able to come back on, and I'm not echoing when I talk, so that's exciting. So hi, Demond, have you heard all of our cool conversation about VR?
Yeah, quick sound check. Can you guys hear me again?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sorry about that. I apologize. I had to go low tech in some capacity. I had to switch over to my phone. But I did hear the conversation, and that VR, I'm not going to use the term that's the wave of the future, but definitely things like that are going to continue to make their way into all forms of learning. Facebook, which has just converted its name to Meta, I believe that's something that they're sort of playing on. So that'll be a platform that we can definitely use as it relates to that. But that was a good discussion, and not to take away from it, but using my organization as an example, we're years of technology in some capacity. And so with that being said, as going back to our conversation on the topic of student engagement, some low tech ways. So in addition, and Lee, I'll definitely help out in some capacity as it relates to that VR research. But quick sound check again. Can you guys still hear me?
You're cutting in and out occasionally. Right now, you're good.
Okay. So so looking at some more low tech solutions for student engagement. Another strategy is called what we call a 1 minute paper. And so what the 1 minute paper exercise
Demond, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we need to work with Oakland and their IT department on getting you better internet service.
Well, he's getting back on. The 1 minute paper, I've used that quite a bit in our officer training. And I try to pick the most contentious issues in our department and get them to speak about it. You know, something as low hanging fruit as, should all fire trucks be red? Right up to, should we still be in the EMS business where I'm from, right? We're integrated fire and EMS. Should we stay in that business or should we get out? Because it's really polarizing. And try and bring it back to, okay, now from an officer's perspective, think about the ramifications of whether we stay in, we stay out, and that sort of thing. And I find it's a hugely beneficial engagement tool, because especially for officers, I find, everyone's so technically savvy when you're a firefighter. You know your skills inside and out, and you're just reviewing them. But making that jump to officer, to now where you're starting to think strategically and you're starting to think of concepts, not nuts and bolts. That 1 minute, 5 minute paper, whether it's verbal or they actually write it down and then present it, or what I'll do sometimes is take them and put them in a diet groups of small 2 or 3 people. They go off, and then like a think, pair, share, they go away, they discuss, and they come back, present to the bigger group. The other great part about that is it takes the pressure off me as the instructor. You guys go, you come up with your thoughts, and then they come back and then they discuss. And that's where the learning occurs with adults, right? They're all experiential. So they're learning from each other's experiences and thoughts. So I don't know if Demon's back, but I just thought I'd throw that in there to kill some time for him.
No,
Yeah.
that's, I think that's,
Thank you for that. Just adding on to that, you know, with that 1 minute paper, there's a couple different ways that you can play it out. With the 1 minute paper, you can pose that particular activity from the perspective and ask the students or the participants to write about the clearest point that they learned from the class that day, or have them discuss how they prepared for class, what they liked best about the learning that took place today, and then last, what they wish would have been discussed during that class or that session today. So those are all ways that you can play with that 1 minute paper concept, a low tech way to satisfy student engagement. Chief Van Dorp, you were going to comment?
well, yeah, I was going to try to build on what Dave was saying. At the Illinois Fire Service Institute, we have a leadership program. It's a week-long program, and it's not exactly low tech, but it's pretty low tech, the way we handle it. So we have a 45-minute hard stop on any lecture, and then it's group discussion after that, whatever the line of education is, whatever the topic is, and the program's built around that. And we mean it's a hard stop. The instructor has to stop talking. So that's a simple low tech method, you know, get the lecturing down and get the participation level up in terms of how you develop the program. So obviously you have to write and build out the small group discussions, but the tech part is there, and I'm sure there's many of them. We use what's called Socrative. It's a really simple app where the instructor throws out a question and all the students answer on their phones or on their tablets. And so the instructor can see all the answers before anybody speaks. And this allows you, because yeah, when you're in that group environment, you know, one guy speaks and then everybody else is like, yeah, what he said kind of thing. And this prevents that. And it also lets you see who's engaged and who's not, and who's read the material and who hasn't. And we found it to be a powerful, powerful tool for managing student engagement, because the students enjoy it. They have a time to reflect and think before they say anything. And they, depending on how the instructor wants to handle it, you don't necessarily have to identify the student with the answer, right? So you can protect their identity if you want, if it's a sensitive topic. So it's a very simple app, very easy to do. It's free, and it's worked really, really well for us.
And free is good, as we know in the fire service. Another strategy for learning engagement, and Dave kind of spoke to it a little bit, it's called playing the devil's advocate. So challenge students to debate and think critically about an issue. Picking on Chief Van Dorp again, in one of his discussions, fire dynamics, he talked about applying water from the inside versus from the outside. Get a group to be for and a group to be against the concept, and then have them come back and argue their points. That's another strategy for student engagement. A sixth strategy, you know, I've sort of lost count, but I'm just making numbers up now. It's called the 3-step interview process. So the 3-step interview, you'll have one participant interview the class or quiz the class on a number of topics about what they learned, and then have a third person, he or she, will play the role of a note taker. So it kind of ties in with that peer-to-peer teaching. So the instructor, he or she does not always have to do the teaching. Now you're getting the students involved in both the learning process and also the delivery process. Strategy number 7 for active learning, student engagement, is called the Brainstorming Challenge. Take out a die, roll the die twice, and add the 2 numbers up, and then those 2 numbers require the group to come up with 5 or 6 ideas. So if they roll the die twice and the sum equals 5, they got to come up with 5 ideas as it relates to a given topic. Another low-tech solution that plays a role in satisfying student engagement, active learning, at the end of the day. As we close this out and we talk about the benefits, we define student engagement, we define active learning. Now let's sum it up and talk about what are the benefits when we engage the firefighters and students in the learning process. One, it helps them build connections in regards to what they have learned. It brings a change of pace to class sessions so that students do not get bored. And all of us have sat in classes before, whether it's a half day or a full day seminar. And each hour we're looking at the clock. Is it almost time to go home? Or we're on our phones or on our laptops, checking our emails, keeping them engaged. Focuses students to participate rather than allowing them to just sit back and be spectators, or what some people will refer to as passive learning. It's all about active learning. Allow students and firefighters, especially if you're in a large organization where you have a mix of young and old, to get to know one another. Probably the biggest, especially when you are discussing a topic or a theme that's challenging for a number of reasons, it allows the class to provide and listen to different perspectives. And then last but not least, it makes it easier to understand and remember the material. So we talk about active learning, whether the learning environment is in the classroom, the fire station, the apparatus bay, at the scene of an emergency. Think of those both low-tech and high-tech strategies that we can use to get them involved in the learning process, make learning fun, and enhance the professional environment. Enhance the profession. Lee, you made mention early on that you had a question or that you wanted us to participate in on behalf of the sponsor.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I mean, obviously, if anybody else has anything they want to add, we'll do that at the very last. I just didn't want anybody to jump off and run away, because we really, really love our new ISFSI coffee mugs. Talk about a fashion statement on your desk. And Fire Department Coffee has been gracious enough to send a pound of coffee. So when you guys are ready, we'll ask, are you ready for us to roll with that?
Yes, ma'am.
This one's going to blow you away. So first of all, I want to introduce you guys to Emily. A lot of you have emailed with her or spoken to her, and you probably don't even know that you're emailing or speaking with her, but Emily's been with us for a couple of years here at ISFSI. You'll see her at FDIC in April. So I'm going to turn it over to her, but she has come up with the world's most craziest trivia question for you to answer. So this is an honor system, no cheating, please, please, please. There's a special place for you if you're a cheater. But first one to answer it correctly in the chat box. So has everybody got their chat box open and ready to go? Hands up when you're done. And Emily, roll. This will blow your minds.
Are you ready? Okay. What did the first vending machine dispense?
Holy Pete.
I have no idea.
Y'all are cracking me up today. None of you are right so far. If we don't get a right answer, we're gonna cut this off here in about 10 seconds. We're gonna go to another one that might be a little bit easier, Emily. I have to decide on. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No one got it right. Emily, would you like to tell everybody what the vending machine dispensed?
Holy water.
Okay.
That's what I said.
Thus you get my joke that if you're a cheater, you have a special place. You go to a special place. You pass that vending machine on your way there. He said, holy shit. All right. So Emily, is there an easier one that you can pull out for us, maybe?
Yes. Okay. What is the driest continent?
You have a winner. Everybody's getting it right for the most part, but the first one in was Caleb with Antarctica, and he is correct. And I got it wrong when Emily asked me, but anybody who guessed Antarctica is correct. But on my screen, it shows that Caleb was the first to answer it, with Chief Schaefer at a close second, and then Norm coming in. Pete, North America? Really?
Sometimes you got to go with the obvious wrong one.
Well,
You know
that's
what-
why
you know
I
what?
thought Antarctica wasn't in it, because it's a.
You know what I think I'm going to do is next time I'm just going to put on Siri and hold it to the microphone while she reads the question.
You're not eligible to win anyway.
Well, that's right. I can do that shit.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, that was fun. I like seeing all of y'all's smiles, and I hope that you'll all go home and do the holy water one tonight with your vending machine. That being said, I think we should host a trivia happy hour at some point with maybe like a bourbon tasting and trivia happy hour, something fun, a little different, that we could all get together and be a little more social. Demond, thanks so much for your time. As always, you're very gracious with your time for ISFSI. We appreciate it. Our members appreciate it. And if you guys need anything, you know where to find your staff.
Very good. Thank you, Demond. Well done.
Thank you, folks.
Good
Bye,
job
everyone.
overcoming the tech
Bye,
stuff.
guys.